So at the moment, it seems like the UK doesn't really have the best international reputation. Of course, I'm not really the most informed on these matters, but it seems like there's a lot going on politically speaking. But what I do know is that when I visited the UK in 2024, late 2024, so fairly recently, I thoroughly enjoyed my time there. That said, the time that I spent there was a lot shorter than I would have liked because I only really got to spend one full day in the UK, and it was in probably the most touristy part of London. Bearing that in mind, in lieu of booking a very expensive flight from Thailand to the UK, I'm going to live vicariously through other Americans who are experiencing culture shock in the UK so that I can get a better understanding of what it's actually like to not just visit the most touristy part of the UK, but actually experience life there as a local, even if just an expat local. That said, let's go ahead and get into this first video.
Middle class in America and middle class in the UK are two completely different things. So as an American living in London, I've come across a couple culture shocks. The slang, the food, the music, like all micro culture shocks. But probably the biggest one was how they identify earning brackets. So something very unique to the UK is social class is very much set. Like the family you're in basically sets the tone, and the family that you marry into, like that is how your kids are going to grow up and where they're probably going to stay.
So I'm not saying that her experience is invalid by any means. I'm sure there is a lot of truth to that. However, what I do disagree with is that not being a thing in the US. Now, I guess she didn't explicitly say it's not a thing in the US, so maybe I'm jumping the gun here and putting words in her mouth. But in case you think that's not a thing in the US, it most certainly is. I do think it's more prominent amongst elites. They try to sort of keep the money in the family, so to speak. But social status definitely has a lot of weight, a lot of value in the US. Maybe even more so than money, is having that political influence, having those connections to people with political influence. And a lot of that is going to be based on the family that you're born into, which is something that is completely out of your control.
To be perceived as upper class or wealthy really doesn't matter how much you make. It matters what your last name is and what your lineage is. And that's very similar for middle class. Like in the UK, middle class means like you have a townhouse in London. It means that you could just skip work for 3 months if you want to. If you have to work to make a living, you are working class. And as the token American in most rooms, I was in the office once and I was talking about how I grew up in a very middle class family. Like we had enough to go around, but like if my dad got laid off, like that would probably be a big deal after like 3 or 4 months. Like we had savings, but we didn't have enough to just stop working for no reason. And the people I was working with, they were trying to explain to me, oh, so you're working class and you're not middle class. So it became this whole debate of like America.
So again, I don't want to jump the gun here, but it kind of seems like this is also just a bit of semantics, because sometimes the way that certain terms, certain phrases are perceived in America is completely different from in the UK or Australia or any other English-speaking country, let alone countries where English is the secondary or tertiary language. So it could also be a bit of that, but if you're from the UK, definitely provide more insight in the comments because I'd love to hear your perspective on this.
American middle class versus UK middle class, because I would classify UK middle class as very much upper class in America. Like these people are millionaires and they're like, oh, they're middle class just because they literally don't have the right last name. Meanwhile, some of these dukes and duchesses or whatever the fucks they are, they're literally going like bankrupt because they can't like afford to keep their estate running. But they're considered upper class just because they have the right last name and they have the title and whatever it is. And so,
but again, I don't even think it's so much about the name itself. It's about what the name has the power to do for you, for those circles, that is. It's the fact that that name has the power, and I'm speaking in American terms here. So again, the whole dynamic could be completely different in the UK, to her point. But that name in the US has the ability to get your child into Harvard University or Yale University rather than going to a public university. And that can make a very big difference in terms of the opportunities they'll have access to. Even going to those universities, that name might hold a lot more weight at that university, which allows you to walk into certain doors that maybe people who are first generation or second generation Americans don't have access to, because they haven't built up that legacy, that lineage, and that prestige within the US.
And something that's just like especially interesting for me is I'm first generation American. So my dad chose to move from the UK to America. That's why I was able to move right back to the UK when I was of age. But like, I definitely see why. Like, he didn't have a great upbringing and he wanted social mobility. And that is what America used to promise. And that's actually what he was able to achieve before our downfall.
So I noticed she said social mobility. Maybe I'm perceiving that incorrectly, but what that sounds like is he wanted more prestige. Now, again, I could be completely wrong. A lot of this is semantics because we both speak English, but it's a different type of English between Americans and British people. So some things do get lost in translation. But I always thought of upward mobility as having more financial mobility, meaning it's not so much about building the prestige and the lineage. That was never something I was personally fascinated by or interested in. I just wanted to make more money so that I could have more freedom. Now, I don't know if that's not also the goal of most British people. I would assume it is. I think that's the goal for most people around the world. But maybe it's not. Maybe it's culturally different. And again, if you're British, I would love to hear more about your take on this.
And in the UK, it's very rigid. Like, middle class seems impossible. That's what we consider upper class in America. Like, the top 5%, maybe not the top 1%, top 5%. And we're calling that middle class. We're calling that middle of the road. You know, because of course, if you work, you're working class. And I always think it's funny too, because like my mom always used to say like, no, we're working class, like your dad works. And I remember coming home from school and I was like, you know, like we're actually considered like lower upper or like high middle class. Like that is where we fall based off of like our income. And she's like, no, like we're working class, maybe we're middle class, like maybe. She never wanted to like flex how much money we had. Meanwhile here it's like, don't even dream of becoming middle class unless you have 5 million in the bank and a townhouse with your name on it to inherit. I just love these little culture shocks, because I do plan on like having a family in this country at one point and like actually living here forever. And it's great to know I'll forever be working class.
Yeah, I mean, again, I know I'm kind of beating a dead horse here, but I do think a lot of this is semantics, and a lot of that does exist in the US. Maybe not to the same extent, though. Maybe not to the same extent, because I feel like in Europe, because the countries are so much older, you have those lineages that literally go back, that span back to before the US even existed. Hundreds of years before. So you have generations who have never even seen poverty in their whole entire lineage. None of them have ever seen poverty at all. So I can see how that could be a thing. But again, I'd love to hear more about the nuances of this if you're British, or if you just have experience with British culture and American culture, or even if you're from another country and you've observed a similar dynamic in your country. Definitely love to hear more about that in the comments. That said, let's go to the next video.
Ugh, he's so hot and he's over 6 foot. Foot? Don't you mean meters? No, we always say height in feet and inches. I thought the UK was on the metric system. Yeah, we are, obviously. Okay, so then if I'm like at the store and I just wanted to buy some apples, it won't be in pounds, it'll be in kilos, right? Yeah, like I said, we're on the metric system. Okay, but then if I asked you how much you weighed? No, well, that's different. It's pounds a stone. Did you just say stone?
Wait. So the UK uses a mix of both? The metric and the imperial? I didn't really know that. But actually, now that I think about it, I vaguely remember being on the bus going into London and seeing a sign that said something something yards. And I was like, yards? Wait a minute. Am I in the Twilight Zone or something? I didn't understand why it said yards because I was 100% certain that they use meters and kilometers, but I guess not. Or maybe they do. I don't know.
Yeah, stone. It's about 14 pounds. Everyone knows that. Okay, so if I asked you what the temperature was today, what would you say? Well, it was quite warm out. I think about 25 degrees. And what about for cars? Like when you're on the roads, do you use kilometers? No, for cars it's miles. And then when you
Wait, wait. That's kind of confusing. And this is interesting because when I was in the UK, albeit again very briefly, I did feel like it was a mixture of the US and the rest of Europe. And by the rest of Europe, I'm referring to the countries I've personally been to. So the Netherlands, Spain, Switzerland, but especially the Netherlands and Switzerland. I felt like it was a mix of those two places. And I actually enjoyed it quite a bit, to my point earlier. But this is kind of strange. I'm not going to lie. Why is it like that? Why is it like that where it's mixed? I'm sure there's some kind of rationale behind it. Or maybe there's not. I don't know. But if you're British, I'd love to hear more about that in the comments.
fill up your gas, it's with gallons? Don't be ridiculous. Of course, we use liters. So then are your cars miles per liter? No, that wouldn't make any sense, would it? It's miles per gallon.
Wait,
Are you-
wait, hold on. So, if you're British, you fill up your car based on liters of petrol, but then when you measure the fuel efficiency is miles per gallon? I genuinely did not know this. I never knew this.
Are you fucking with me right now? No, I'm being serious. When did you switch to the metric system then? Was it like last week and that's why everything's so mixed? No, it's been since 1965. Okay.
Wait, so the UK switched to the metric system in 1965? That's actually fairly recent. What made the UK switch? Well, I guess it's fairly obvious what made the UK switch to the metric system. It's just more efficient and more intuitive. But I guess that kind of explains why there are traces of the imperial system as well, because again, that's fairly recent. But does that not make day-to-day life a little more complicated? Or maybe just because you're so used to it, it doesn't? Let me know more about this. I'm very, very curious about the UK because if I'm being completely honest, I think if I didn't want to live in the Netherlands but still wanted to be in Europe, the UK would be second on my list. So I'm very, very curious to hear about this as well as the class dynamics. Let me know in the comments what your thoughts are about all of this.